Hello, world, and welcome to the Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, and showbiz stories, news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today's topic is great movie comedies of all time. Here's Steve, Arthur, and Julian.
What a topic, guys. I mean, we could name 100 movies and we'd be here literally all day and all night. But we've asked each other to cull our comedies down to 5. And the first one I want to mention just made me laugh and laugh and laugh and still makes me laugh is Airplane, 1980. This is the Zucker brothers and Jim Abrahams. The only time, by the way, that 3 directors have gotten credit for one movie. In fact, they had to fight with the DGA to get permission to do that. But do you guys remember Airplane?
Oh, my gosh, yes. What a hysterical film.
Now, interestingly, last year, I rented 0 Hour, which was a 1957 Dana Andrews airplane disaster movie. And I immediately noticed that the lead character's name was Ted Stryker. And I realized, oh my God, this is what Airplane. The producers of Airplane actually bought the rights to 0 Hour so that they could spoof literally everything and pull actual lines of dialogue and scenes right out of the old movie without being.
Have we all seen 0 Hour? Because it is absolutely great camp. I mean, that's a funny movie.
No. 0 Hour is not funny at all. It's totally drama.
It's funny, I think, if you look at it as terrible acting in a ridiculous scene and terrible. It's funny. You know, High and the Mighty was not funny.
High and the Mighty was not
0 Hour was, to me, it was funny anyway. I think it was funny. And that's why they took the pick. That's why they did it.
I think what made 0 Hour even funnier was Airplane.
Right.
Because I kept saying, oh, they took that. Oh, they took that one. Oh, that was great. So,
but yeah. Julian, the fact is they took 0 Hour because they thought, the Airplane guys thought it was funny. It was funny in a serious way. It was one of those pictures. That's all.
It was funny in a serious way. I like that's an interesting turn of phrase. But what's interesting is the Zucker brothers and Abrahams cast a bunch of actors who had never done comedy before to play totally straight roles. People like Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges, Leslie Nielsen had never come within 20 miles of comedy. And they were hysterically funny. And of course, Robert Hayes played the lead actor. And I thought it was just really funny. The filmmakers had done something called Kentucky Fried Movie, which was a series.
We distributed it. We had it.
There you go.
A lot of business. Yes.
A lot of business, comedy sketches, and very funny stuff. This was an era in the late 70s, early 80s when these comedy reviews were done. I think another one was called Tunnel Vision, and really funny stuff. But Airplane, to this day, when I talk to some people, I say, Shirley, don't tell me that. And then I say, but don't call me Shirley, that kind of thing. It's just really funny.
I just want to mention one thing quickly, if I may. A friend of mine and I were sitting in a bar in a hotel in Beverly Hills, going back some years. And we're talking to each other, and this really beautiful girl comes up to the table and says, I hear you talking about movies and show business. I just wanted to say hello. Maybe I could join you. So I enjoy the conversation. And she is the daughter of Robert Stack. Now, what's interesting is she looked exactly like Robert Stack. It was unbelievable. She had the same face, and here's a beautiful girl. And he was a very good-looking guy. The daughter of Robert Stack. That was great. And she was good for conversation. It was a lot of fun. Anyhow.
Well, another one of the funny moments is when Barbara Billingsley, who had been known as the mother on Leave It to Beaver, she's asked to translate 2 jive-talking black actors.
Very funny.
Getting Barbara Billingsley to do that scene. Now, apparently, according to IMDb, the original person they wanted was Harriet Nelson, Ozzie Nelson's wife. But apparently she thought it was a little bit off color with the language, so she refused to do it, although she later regretted not doing it. But that scene is just totally hysterical. This whole concept, by the way, of spoofing classic movies, non-classic movies, started a whole thing, especially with the Zucker brothers. They did it again.
And look what happened with Young Frankenstein, for example. Spoofing a great horror film and making it incredibly funny. It's interesting. The history of comedy in motion pictures goes back to the Charlie Chaplin and the Buster Keaton and the Harold Lloyd, the guys who really made the comedies, Fatty Arbuckle. And it all started with them. And I think our great ones, who also act, write, and direct, are Mel Brooks and Woody Allen. Incredible work that these both men have done. Woody, despite all the problems we know of, as an artist, has done close to 50 movies. It's incredible. When all of us know how hard it is to get one movie made, he's done that many.
Let's not leave out Blake Edwards if we're going to make a list, however short it is, of directors who've done some very funny movies.
But he didn't act in them, Arthur. I'm sticking with acting, writing, and directing, and he didn't do that, Blake.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, the thing I lament about every week these days, it's become kind of a trope for me, is how comedy, really good feature comedy, has literally disappeared from big screen. There are some comedies featured on television streaming. They're not very good. You mentioned Mel Brooks, you mentioned Woody Allen, Albert Brooks. These people are titans in the comedy world. They don't do comedies anymore. Obviously, they're either retired or left the business, or like in Albert Brooks' case, he now makes dramas. We need more comedy voices. We definitely do.
Albert Brooks made Defending Your Life, which is such a creative, funny movie with Meryl Streep, taking place after you die. You find out what happens after you die in Albert Brooks land. And it is terrific. Really a funny film.
Rob Reiner is a funny guy, very funny guy. He's done some terrific movies. But I maintain that in relating to comedy movies, which is the theme of today, that there are comedies, but the fact of the matter is that most of these comedies have these classic scenes in them. So it becomes, what's the greatest comedy movie? What's the greatest comedy scene? In terms of the scenes, Dr. Strangelove, the scene where Peter Sellers is in the wheelchair. To me, that's the Tiger Woods, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Michael Jordan of comedy scenes. I've never seen that topped. And that went on for, Julian, you want to guess about one or 2 minutes, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, it was a long time. He was great, Peter Sellers, and he was part of all our childhoods, especially Arthur and myself, because The Mouse That Roared came into America with a guy we never heard of. The Mouse That Roared, Peter Sellers, as good as it gets. Good. And he plays, I think, in that one as well, 3 or 4 roles. So,
well, he did a little movie, a sleeper, which never did too much business, but it was called The Party, where there's no dialogue. And he just goes through this movie. It's hysterical. Have you seen it, you guys? The Party?
Yeah, The Party. Sure. He's dressed as he's in Indian dress, as I recall.
What's also rather fun to look up is how many great comic movies came from Saturday Night Live actors, participants. It's an amazing group of Steve Martin and Chevy Chase and oh my God, Adam Sandler, Eddie Murphy. Yeah, Eddie Murphy. I mean, it's amazing to me. Mike Myers, they all came from Saturday Night Live and all made very successful movies. So that's
Mike Myers, Austin Powers.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. Yeah,
funny stuff. Straight out comedies. So we have these lists that we all made of our favorite, so to speak, 5 comedies. I'm going to comment on mine very quickly, and then you guys go. I have the outtakes of Young Frankenstein, which is not a movie, it's just the outtakes, as the funniest thing I've ever seen on film. Anybody disagree? Just the outtakes?
Well, you're gonna have to clue me in because I don't think I've seen the outtakes.
Oh, you are missing something terrific.
Steve, you have to. I'm sending it to you for Christmas or Hanukkah. I'll send it. Just go into YouTube and ask for outtakes. You're on YouTube.
Oh, good.
To me, that's the funniest piece of film I've ever seen. And the second funniest film would be Young Frankenstein itself. It doesn't get much better than that wall to wall. As I say, there's great scenes in comedies, but to get wall to wall is hard. I mean, Stanley Kramer tried it with Mad Mad World. They had a great, entertaining movie, but it really wasn't wall to wall funny. It's hard to do that, but they did it.
The idea of taking a horror and turning it into comedy was done very successfully by Abbott and Costello back in the 50s. They did it. Abbott and Costello Frankenstein, which completely destroyed horror for 20 years. I mean, after seeing that funny, nobody could take horror films seriously. And it was so funny. Of course, Abbott and Costello had been, entertaining people since the 40s, but that movie particularly, and the Young Frankenstein is very much of that same ilk, take a very serious story and turn it on its head.
But Mel Brooks did that. He did that with several movies. The Birds was Hitchcock. He was always, doing that with directors and things.
Well,
producers was not so, it was original.
On Young Frankenstein, though, it really was Gene Wilder whose idea it was, who wrote most of it or much of it, and came up with it. And as great as Mel Brooks is, and he makes me laugh from the 2,000-year-old man on, his best movies are with Gene Wilder, whether it's Producers, Blazing Saddles, or Young Frankenstein, which to me are his three best movies. They all have that one thing in common: the brilliant Gene Wilder. Who I saw.
Was Wilder in High Anxiety? Was Wilder in that? Because I love High Anxiety.
I don't think so.
No.
I saw Wilder when he was an unknown actor. He was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on Broadway with Kirk Douglas, and he played Billy Bibbit, the stutterer, on Broadway. And then he did a show called The White House Story with Helen Hayes and James Daly, Tyne Daly's father, about the presidents and their wives. Nothing to do with comedy. But so it was. Arthur Penn put him in that. And what had happened was he was working with Anne Bancroft on Broadway in Mother Courage, Gene Wilder. And that's how he came, because Mel was married to Annie. He would come visit, and Gene Wilder and Mel became friends, and Wilder said, Wilder was told by Mel, I'm going to do this movie and I want you in it. And that was, of course, one of my favorite movies of all time, The Producers, with Zero Mostel. Hysteria has never been played greater. That blue blanket that he holds on to.
Oh, my God. I'm wet enough.
Yeah.
But Gene Wilder is one of those guys, too, that could make you laugh with just a look. No, he didn't have to have words. Another guy who I shouldn't say he's underrated because he's a great actor, terrific guy, a guy I knew for a long time, Eugene Levy. Eugene Levy could make me laugh with just his eyes. He was funny. But, every great comedian will always tell you that a person is either funny or they're not funny. And that's very true. You either have it or you don't have it. A lot of bad comedians have made a living, I guess, but the great ones are all funny. They're funny people. They say, hello, it's funny. Or the look in the face. Sid Caesar, Julian, you're more familiar with him, was brilliant in sketch comedy, but didn't have much going otherwise.
He could not speak well. He was not able to just talk, but he could do great dialect. He could do sketch, yeah. And I enjoyed my time working with him, because the first movie I ever produced was 10 from Your Show of Shows. And I worked with him very, very long time with my co-producer and director, Millie Sherman. We both did that. So that was kind of fun working with him. I know, Arthur, you worked and knew very well Milton Berle. I can tell you a quick story I'd never told you that Stanley Kramer told me, that in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, Kramer had to often say, Milton, you got to stop being the last person out of frame. You keep waiting around while the camera's rolling. So, but you knew him really well, Arthur. Tell us a good Milton Berle story.
Well, Milton knew every trick in the book. He was a comedy encyclopedia. A lot of people didn't like Milton Berle, not so much his comedy, but he was sometimes not liked by people who knew him personally. What he was a king of comedy. He knew everything that there was about comedy: a double take, a triple take, waiting, like you just said, for the last camera shot. He knew all the tricks. Milton was, his timing was impeccable. And it was impeccable till he was 92 and died. He was always funny in conversation, but not telling jokes or anything like that. It was just his mannerism and way to talk, but he knew comedy and he loved. He told me the last of the guys from the old group that were still around was Billy Crystal. And I would agree. I don't know that anybody is beyond Billy Crystal from the old club of the great comedians, the Buddy Hackett's, Don Rickles. It's the old thing of if you had a Mount Rushmore of comedians who would be on it. Now, I wouldn't have Milton in that top four, but I'd put him in with a qualifier. The qualifier would be Milton at a stag roast, emceeing a stag roast. There was nobody funnier doing that. Just like Red Buttons would not be on the top four, but he would be in the qualifiers of after dinner speaking. No one could follow Red Buttons doing what he did. Milton knew everybody. He just knew everybody. He was born in 1909. He just knew Jack Dempsey, you name it, and he knew him. Knew Sinatra. Told a great story that I'll convey here. That Elizabeth Taylor asked him to drive with her in a limousine to Las Vegas for the opening of Eddie Fisher. And Milton, of course, said, great. And they get into a car. It's about 1961, thereabout. And they're driving. They get to Barstow, and Elizabeth Taylor says, Milton, I've got to go to the bathroom. I got to pee. So let's stop at that gas station. So the limousine stops at the gas station, and she tells Milton, this is Milton talking, when I go into the bathroom, stand in front. Make sure nobody comes in while I'm in the bathroom. I don't like that. So Milton said, fine, of course, don't go in. So in she goes to the bathroom, and as she goes in, a big bus of Japanese tourists arrive at this Barstow gas station to get out and have drinks or snacks or whatever. And as they get off the bus with Elizabeth Taylor inside, Milton says, ladies and gentlemen, in this bathroom behind me is Elizabeth Taylor peeing. That's what's happening. $5 a piece, please. And she's screaming from the bathroom, Milton, you asshole, what are you doing? He had a zillion stories, like that. God almighty, he could do a book of that. But he knew everything there was to know about comedy, and he could tell you a comedian whether he was funny on sight. This guy is funny, this guy is not funny. It's like one time somebody asked Frank Sinatra, what makes a great singer? And he says, it's not the throat, it's the heart. So a lot of guys with good voices, but you got to convey the passion. Anyhow,
let's get to Steve and another. What's another one on your fabulous list?
Well, how can you mention movie comedy and not mention Tootsie? 1982. The only reason it wasn't Best Picture that year was because there was a movie called Gandhi, which took all of the awards. In fact, Ben Kingsley beat out Dustin Hoffman. I always thought Dustin Hoffman won an acting Oscar for Dorothy Michaels. He didn't. He lost to Ben Kingsley. And that movie just plays and plays and plays. And
Steve, there was one line in that movie that was so outrageously funny. And it was just one line, maybe 4 words. And that was, they said, how far back can we push the camera because she looks so ugly? And the woman says, how about Cleveland?
Yeah. Well, we should point out.
Is that Larry Gelbart?
No, Larry Gelbart actually, it was really Elaine May. And Elaine May would not take credit for it. And I asked her, why won't you take credit? You invented the Bill Murray role. It wasn't there.
Right.
You invented Terry Garr. You came up with the guy outside singing Some Enchanted Evening out the window.
And he was great. That was the guy from Police Academy.
Yes. And she said, the idea that an actor can't make it as a man and makes it as a woman is such a great idea, and I didn't think of that, so I would not take credit. But fortunately, both Sidney Pollack, the director, and Dustin Hoffman went public and said, without Elaine May, there's no Tootsie. So did she do the Cleveland line, Julian? Yes, yeah. Oh, I don't know if she did the Cleveland line. It certainly sounds like her, but I don't know. Actually, the truth is, it sounds more like Larry. Actually, it sounds more like
the audience roared in the theater. Yeah. Guys, you're talking about films here. Nobody's mentioned Animal House. Are you kidding? I mean, it broke a mold. Animal House was like chorus line in Broadway.
Let me mention one other thing about Tootsie before we move on to Animal House. Apparently, the experience of working on Kramer versus Kramer, the previous film for Dustin, the idea of trying to balance being the father and the mother in this divorce situation with Meryl Streep, inspired him to begin the process, which, as you point out, Julian eventually got to Elaine May and a number of other writers. Murray Schiskell, I guess, was Dustin's guy. And a lot of people worked on that script, but just talk about a script where everybody was delivering their A game. I mean, and I have to say this, Dustin as a woman, I thought she was cute. I thought they made him up nicely. Apparently there were a number of things they had to do.
Okay, Steve, we now have a problem, but okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh,
you did say that you thought Dustin was cute as the woman?
I thought he was very cute.
I'm just joking, of course, yes.
But anyway, apparently they had to give him glasses to cover up his nose, his schnoz. That made him a little bit more attractive. And the cameraman gave him a special kind of coating for the glasses so the lights wouldn't reflect badly off of him. And then he went through a whole transformation. I think it was 2 hours a day in the morning to get into that makeup. And the whole idea of having Sidney Pollack, the director, play his agent was something.
But there too is the scene sitting in the Russian tea room.
Oh, of course. And
Sidney Pollack was hysterical.
And he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it. And Dustin hit him, pressured him, sent him roses every day for a month until he finally caved in and decided to play.
How great was Charlie Durning in that movie?
Charlie Durning.
Charlie Durning was great in anything.
Actually, my debut feature producing, I had Charlie Durning in Bleacher Bums. I'll tell you that another time. But getting on to Animal House, I agree with you, Arthur. Animal House was revolutionary. It was that Saturday Night Live gang, and it was starting. There was a turning of the guard in terms of being a little bit outrageous, not only with storyline but with language. There were things where they would do things in that movie that weren't done before. For instance, I think John Belushi is introduced standing in front of the Delta house, and he, I guess Thomas Hulsey, being the new person in the frat, walks up to him, and I guess Belushi's peeing, and he turns around to shake hands with Thomas Hulsey and pees on him. It's just too much.
How about the thing when who goes up the ladder when the girl's undressing and breaks the fourth wall? I think it looks at the audience. I forget who that character was.
No, that's Belushi. He climbs up.
Was that Belushi? Yeah.
Oh yeah, and he just falls completely back, and one scene after another. Just
how about the scene when they're cutting off the horse's legs in the background, the wooden horse
with the chainsaw.
With the chainsaw. Animal House is one of those movies. I think I would like to just take one moment here for the audience and all. We can do it ourselves, but each and every one, we all did prepare lists of our top 5 comedies of all time, and I think our listeners would love to hear what they are. So, Steve, why don't you list yours, and then Julian.
Well, I've mentioned 2 of mine already, Tootsie and My Favorite Year. I also put down Lost in America from Albert Brooks, and I put down, I also mentioned Airplane earlier, and my final one was Love and Death, the Woody Allen movie.
Let's go back to your Lost in America scenes, great scenes. When Albert Brooks is asking Gary Marshall to forgive all the money that his wife lost in a casino. That scene is a top 10 scene in any comedy. Steve, please talk about that scene.
Oh, of course. For those listeners who have never seen Lost in America, Albert Brooks and Julie Haggerty play a couple who decide to, through a series of events, go on the road and discover America in their motorhome. But Julie insists that they stop off in Las Vegas to get remarried. And I remember Albert Brooks thought his character does not want to do that. But they do, and Julie Haggerty, who apparently has never mentioned gambling in her life, goes down to the roulette wheel while he's sleeping in his bed, and she basically loses their entire fortune in a night of gambling. And Albert Brooks wakes up. He's in his bathrobe. He walks into the casino. The guard says, "You can't walk around here in a casino." And he says, "Well, Robert Redford rode a horse in here, a few movies ago, whatever." And so he goes to see Gary Marshall, who plays the casino owner, who has already told him that his wife is not having a good night to end all nights. And he tries to explain to him how he should get his money back.
And he says,
basically, you give us our money back, and we start a whole ad campaign where the Desert Inn has heart. And Gary Marshall replies, "Well, wait, if we give you your money back, that means we have to give everybody their money back. The casino's our big, money maker. How do I do that?" And the dialogue back and forth is so funny. And
Gary Marshall's response is, "Let me get this straight, right?
Right.
You want me to you lost all your money. You want me to give it back to you?" He said, "Hey, we'll put it on billboards. We'll advertise the hotel with heart. Is that right?"
Exactly.
Well, that's the funny part. Anyway, it's a very funny scene.
It's a great movie. Mike, what is one of your films on your list?
On my list? Oh, wow. I feel honored, guys. One of mine, of course, is It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, is one of my favorite movies of all time. It has all of the classic actors of that era. And it was almost like a who's who of comedy. You had literally, in the leads, you had Milton Berle, you had Sid Caesar, you had Mickey Rooney, you had, of course, so many.
Jonathan Winters.
Jonathan Winters was wonderful in it as the mover.
Ethel Merman, Buddy Hackett.
Yeah, exactly. And you name it. You even had the Three Stooges in this movie. You had, Jerry Lewis show up. You had Don Knotts. Phil Silvers was such a scumbag in this movie. But he is in most of his roles. But it was just wonderful and everything. It's just
that you mentioned the Three Stooges. We all made lists, and the only person who mentioned Three Stooges is my nephew David Teitelbaum. Has Three Stooges, any two reels of Three Stooge comedies on his list, and he's right. What's funnier than the Three Stooge comedies? Every one of those things were great. Short. We saw them as kids initially. I don't know that there's been any more profitable movies in the history of movie business than the Three Stooge comedies, which were made for $1.48 and still exist and make money. Harry Cohn made a fortune with those things at Columbia. Julian, what are your 5 favorites?
Well, I've mentioned the producers. I mentioned Mad, Mad World, and I mentioned Young Frankenstein. Around 1979, 1980, I spent an entire year making a rock and roll concert movie for Warner Brothers called No Nukes with Bruce Springsteen and James Taylor and Carly Simon. And I spent a year with the rock and rollers, a whole new breed. If you called them for 3 p.m., if they showed up at 7 p.m., they couldn't understand why you were annoyed. I mean, it was a whole different world. And I go to see this mockumentary, a first movie that Rob Reiner ever made, called This Is Spinal Tap. Now, I am literally falling out of my seat, laughing so hard. And I know the major reason was that I made No Nukes. because I understood. I had a whole front row seat to what he was lampooning and playing with. So I have to put that in. Maybe it's not the greatest movie ever made or one of the great, but boy, it made me laugh more than any film. And the final film is when I'm doing the research for our show, I was looking up the great comedies, and not one person had what I consider this brilliant comedy written by Andrew Bergman called The In-Laws, with Peter Falk and Alan Arkin, which I think is as funny as any film I've ever seen. And that, I guess, would be my fifth. I think we should really point out that there's no such thing as the five greatest. It's not really, we're just talking in terms of films that we really loved, and we recognize that there's so many in comedy.
It is.
Arthur mentioned the Stooges and how they made them for $1.50. Universal was on its ass as a studio until Abbott and Costello came along, and that kept them going. And then after that, it was Donald O'Connor in Francis the Talking Mule.
Sure.
We're talking in terms of comedy keeping studios alive.
And whose voice was Francis, Julian?
Oh, Chill Wills.
There you go.
Chill Wills.
Good one.
Yeah. Well, here it is, 2023, and virtually every comedy we've talked about is pre-1990. So what is, based on my earlier conversation, where has good comedy gone in 33 years? If I had to name a funny movie of the last 30 years, I don't know if there's one movie I saw, it's probably now 10 years ago, maybe a little less, This Is the End, which has Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill and all those guys. It's about the rapture, the end of the world. And it's very, very raunchy and outrageous, but it did make me laugh. But it's hard to find a comedy of the last 30 years.
Well, comedies are, you need funny people to make comedy. Funny writers.
They do.
Funny comedians, funny actors. And so are we lacking in that? Or is everybody just want to put on spandex and do the next Spider-Man and try for $1 billion?
Well, there's an axiom, I've heard it, and I don't believe it, but there's an axiom that says, and you've always said, Arthur, that the international box office is so critical now to movie profitability, and there are people in Hollywood who say that American comedy does not translate overseas.
Visually it would, yeah.
Yeah,
slapstick would.
I think if you're doing a Woody Allen comedy, which has so much reference to language, maybe that's true. But if you've got a comedy with some good sight gags and a good storyline, I think it could work anywhere.
Well, visually to know that Woody Allen overseas is sensational.
Oh, okay.
Woody was able to make his movies because of France, Italy, Germany, and Spain, and Japan, and Brazil. That's how he was able to make his movies when the studios were not backing him.
Because he plays smart, and all those countries like Great England and France and Germany have a good segment of their population is smart, and that's how he plays. Right here in the United States, that's his base audience. Or in those days, maybe young college students and stuff of that sort. But
it is true that Mel Brooks producers did not do anything overseas. Blazing Saddles did not do anything overseas. 12 Chairs didn't. But when Young Frankenstein came out, and that's a worldwide name that everyone knew, they discovered Mel Brooks, Young Frankenstein, and then they all came back. The same author can tell you the same thing happened with the James Bond movies. Your first couple of them, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, they were not phenomenal. But when Goldfinger came out, whoa, it brought the whole thing back into.
Well, I know after Goldfinger came out, somebody, United Artists, came up with the brilliant idea of putting together a double feature of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, and it killed them, especially in drive-ins. I want to mention something again about scenes and lines. Was anything ever funnier in a movie theater than when Harry Met Sally and the line in Katz's Delicatessen when Rob Reiner's mom recites that great line, "I'll have what she's having." That line is, again, 5 words, but the roar of the audience. You know, being a theater owner, and you sit there sometimes, and the roar is unbelievable, as it was with the wheelchair of the Henry Kissinger-looking Peter Sellers. Audience roared, took, you know. And when they make those movies, they know that there's going to be laughter. They don't know how much until they sneak preview it. And I remember seeing a sneak, so they have to be careful in the timing of after the laugh of how long it will last. I remember in Boston, they had a director's sneak preview of Foul Play, Chevy Chase, Goldie Hawn. Very funny movie, guys. Good movie, too. And they had, in the back of the theater, were about 20 writers with their little lamps on their pens and stuff, writing away at the audience reactions, which always take place, especially with comedies, you know. Did they laugh here? Did it work? Did it not work? Comedies are, I think it's just getting a wall-to-wall comedy, something that makes you laugh from beginning to end. That's hard. But some lines, certain scenes will last forever, and they're funny every time you look at it. Some Like It Hot has to be mentioned as one of the great movies of all time. It's certainly one of the great comedies of all time. That is a movie that worked.
We were talking about that today because Billy Wilder was a comedy master, but he was also very capable of making comedy and drama work alongside one another. I mean, Some Like It Hot is very funny, but there are times in that movie that are very serious. Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis are standing behind a car in a garage when these gangsters come in and line up their enemies against the wall to precipitate the St. Valentine's Day massacre. That was pretty serious stuff, and yet there was something funny about Tony and Jack and their characters hiding behind a car, hoping to survive. And
you agree that that was a masterpiece? Why don't we do a show on Billy Wilder? Let's do a show on Billy Wilder.
We will do a show on Billy Wilder.
Most eclectic great director of all time. Most eclectic great director.
The other moment in The Apartment, which is also a Billy Wilder movie, which we will discuss when we do Billy Wilder Night, also mentioned drama or featured drama and comedy. Hence, the term dramedy has become a genre staple in Hollywood. In fact, a lot of television shows that are nominated these days for comedy Emmys also have dramatic elements and can be declared to be dramedies. What's another film on your list, Mike?
For me, you know, one of them, it actually goes off of one of them that Julian had mentioned, because he had mentioned Spinal Tap. And from Spinal Tap, you know, you started getting a crew together that, you know, started doing movies and such that were more improv based. And they had, you know, movies like Best in Show. And also, of course, the one I'm going to talk about is called A Mighty Wind, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Mighty Wind with the folk singers. Oh, God. Excuse me. Was there ever a funnier scene in a movie than in Best of Show when Larry Miller is talking to, is it Catherine O'Hara? And Eugene Levy's at the table. I don't think there was ever a funnier scene. There were some scenes that were as funny. But when he says to her, you know, in high school, when you used to put your legs up, the way you did that, and her husband is sitting at Eugene Levy, and the kid gets the dog and puts the dog up, and that's as funny as Lost in America, as Peter Sellers. That scene was priceless. Great movie.
The first time I remember seeing Eugene Levy was in a Ron Howard comedy called Splash, where he played the dentist he was at the dentist when Tom Hanks comes barreling in and tells him how he ruined his life because he's discovered the mermaid, and it's pretty funny stuff.
We should though point out that there are some recent comedies that are quite different and unique.
I'm sorry?
Like this fellow Sacha Baron Cohen makes some of these films which are really quite unique and funny and enjoyable. Judd Apatow has been making some very funny movies, and successfully so. Wes Anderson, a whole other kind of film so it's not like we're not sitting and saying only it's the old timer, but I think one of the best films, and I don't know if anybody listed it. I know I didn't, but I just thought of it, and I loved it, was Groundhog's Day. I thought that was clever, unique, again, funny, and Bill Murray was never
good movie,
more enjoyable for me than to watch Groundhog's Day. Do you guys like Groundhog's Day?
I would take the S out though, because I think it's called Groundhog Day.
Not in my theory.
I list a movie here called The Jerk with Steve Martin. It's a pretty funny film.
First movie, his first movie too.
He was great. Carl Reiner directed. Carl Reiner was funny, to say the least. But on my list, I have Young Frankenstein outtakes first, Young Frankenstein number 2, Some Like It Hot 3, Dr. Strangelove 4, Pink Panther was funny. Great. Again, great scenes. Blake Edwards, the jerk. And my personal favorites I have down as Abbott, Costello Meet Frankenstein, which we've all talked about, a groundbreaking kind of a movie. On your list, Operation Madball is one of the most obscure little funny movies directed by Blake Edwards. A little scene that Mickey Rooney plays, again, in the elite of elite funny scenes. If you ever see it, if anybody's ever seen it, but
Ernie
Jack
Kovacs,
Lemmon was in it.
The movie with Ernie Kovacs.
Yeah. Catherine Grant.
Yeah.
Terrific little movie, did no business.
Ernie Kovacs, who was a mainstay on American television, was supposed to get a role in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. But unfortunately, he died just before the movie started shooting. That's why we didn't get the blessing of Ernie Kovacs.
Got killed in a car crash.
Yes. The other group that we haven't talked about at all, which goes back to the 30s, is the Marx Brothers, who were very much ahead of their time. In fact, the very first time I saw a Marx Brothers movie, I saw it by accident. I was home from school with a bad cold, and I noticed in the TV guide that they were running a movie called Monkey Business. Now, I knew Monkey Business as a 1951 Marilyn Monroe, Cary Grant, Ginger Rogers comedy about the Fountain of Youth, which you guys may or may not remember.
I remember.
But
I remember.
Yeah,
I remember anything Marilyn Monroe was in. Even the cameos.
Even the cameos. Anyway, so I put on the television, I'm going to watch Marilyn Monroe, and I get Chico Marx, as I've learned over the years. It wasn't Chico, it was Chico, because he was always chasing chicks. And that was Monkey Business, apparently also the title of a Marx Brothers comedy. And I remember coming back from a trip to Mexico, and they were doing a Marx Brothers marathon at the Universal Amphitheater Theater, and I saw 4 Marx Brothers movie, and Duck Soup has to be one of the funniest movies ever. Just just everything about that movie was funny.
Go back to Milton Berle for one more second, guys, because he's, again, the encyclopedia, and I do remember so much of the things that he talked about. In his opinion, the funniest comedy team, not only brothers, but whatever, in the history of show business was the Ritz brothers. And he felt that Harry Ritz was maybe the funniest guy that ever lived. Now, the Ritz brothers had comedy movies at that time, I think out of the 30s, maybe the early 40s. Not very popular, but that's just one man's opinion. But if you ever see them, Harry Ritz is funny, very funny.
I've heard about the Ritz brothers for years, but I've never seen a Ritz brothers. Somebody should put together a Ritz brothers marathon.
YouTube, I'm sure it's on there. Another movie that we haven't mentioned is Caddyshack. Very funny movie.
That was Rodney Dangerfield's first movie, actually.
There you go.
Arthur, you knew him. You knew him, Arthur.
I did know Rodney. Yes, I did. What can I say?
Is it true that Rodney was selling aluminum or something when he was an aluminum salesman?
When his name was Jack Roy. Rodney Danger was a funny character, and they just put him in that movie, and it was perfect. He couldn't have been more perfect in that particular role in that country club. It was filmed in Florida. There's a good book out on it, on the making of the movie. Mark Canton was a studio exec at the time, and he had to go down to Florida during the making of the movie. It was hysterical. I wish I remember the name of the book, but I don't. Caddyshack is a top-flight comedy. It puts you right into that world. and Rodney Dangerfield could not be more perfect. We met him. My God, I was together with Rodney Dangerfield and Buddy Hackett, a good friend, at the Pritikin Center to lose weight. But the menu at the Pritikin Center was to lose weight, to stop having drugs, to stop drinking booze, to do whatever. I mean, it was one of these places that I needed to lose 15, 20 pounds, and so on. And so I'd never met Rodney until then, but Buddy, of course, knew him well. And we go, Rodney's sitting alone at the table with his hands. The food there was not great. It was obviously going to lose weight. It's like eating cardboard. And Rodney was sitting there, looked at me, said, Buddy says you're in a movie theater business. You steal money, right? And I said, only from your movies, Rodney. Only from your movies. Rodney Dangerfield was there for the entire menu. He was there to get off of, to lose weight, to stop drugging, to stop drinking. And we went up to his room in the hotel. It was like the Y. And in the room, it was like he was smoking his drapes. Everything was marijuana in this place. He was an amazing guy, but he was very, very funny. And in that movie, he was funny. And Caddyshack has to belong in that group for me. I mentioned a movie here that no one talks about, but it was terrifically funny. It was a great movie called Victor Victoria. How do we feel about that? Oh,
it was really funny. And I knew Bob Preston very well. He was terrific. And I was doing a documentary called Going Hollywood the 30s that I was producing and directing, and I wanted him to narrate it. And he had done my radio show. So I called him in California and said, would you do this show? And he said, well, do you have any budget? I said, well, not really, not very much money. But I only need you for a day. He said, well, how much can you pay me? And I said, well, embarrassingly, I said $5,000. And he falls over laughing and says to me, I was just nominated for the Academy Award for Victor Victoria, and my first offer is $5,000.
Well, what you should have said, that most actors who are nominated for an Academy Award don't work for 2 years.
Exactly. And Steve, I give you my word, I did say that. He did not find that funny. Not at all.
There's a comedy element brought out by one actor in a relative drama. Like one of my favorite movies is Jerry Maguire with Tom Cruise. But Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character, that whole show me the money sequence is so funny. And Cuba, of course, won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actor. And I actually have cast him in my 12 Anxious Men spoof.
You got that in. You got that in, didn't you, Steve Marino? You certainly did.
Tom Cruise. Let's stay with Tom Cruise for a second. Big movie star, as big as he's ever been. Tom Cruise can be very funny. And Jerry Maguire, there's some scenes in there that'll tell you that. He was also great in Rain Man. So he's not, some people perceive him as being a one-dimensional actor in action-driven movies. Tom Cruise is consummate, and one of the things he does is funny, is comedy. It's great.
That's right. We should talk about a film I'll bet my bottom dollar on, which I'm pretty close to these days anyhow, which is Broadway Danny Rose. Now, there's a movie that has got such comedy in it, and of course takes place often in the Carnegie Deli in New York City. But
that's when Woody Allen and Mia Farrow actually got along, I think.
Well, yes, they were more than getting along. They were, as Winchell would say, an item. Yes,
an item. That's right.
One of my favorite movies of all time. Beyond comedy, Broadway Danny Rose, top 20 film for me. The acts that he represented, I mean, it was hysterical.
With Woody Allen are classics, but I will say this, that one of my favorite comedies of the last 20 years was a Woody Allen movie without Woody Allen, which was Midnight in Paris, where Owen Wilson played the Woody Allen character. And I thought was pretty darn funny. That the situation was very funny.
And Vicky,
one of his biggest hits, by the way, Midnight in Paris.
I think its biggest hit. I think. Also, Vicky Cristina Barcelona is quite a movie without Woody in it. That is one hell of a movie. to watch. And Match Point is totally different from almost all his movies, and a terrific mystery. It really works. So there's a great talent, sadly.
Now, let me ask a question, because this movie mystified me because I was ready to see a good Woody Allen comedy. I went to see Zelig. Now, did you guys like Zelig? Was it a positive for you?
I loved it. I didn't like it. I loved it because it said everything about fame and fortune in this country. It really was a great, great satire, and I thought Zelig is one of his most brilliant movies that he made. So yes, I agree. I loved it.
I agree completely. I agree. We had when we went first run film in the antiquated in 1927 Harvard Square Theater in Cambridge, which we took over, my partners and I. The first movie that I had a bid for that came up was Zelig. And I figure if there's ever been ham and cheese or ice cream and pie or cake, if you like, it's Zelig in Harvard Square. And we bid for it heavy, got it. And what can I tell you? It was huge. Yeah, I love the movie, Steve. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, then I need to see it again, because I obviously did not enjoy it my first time, but everybody has a thought. Getting back to Bill Murray,
we should talk about, how about the fish called Wanda? And how about the Monty Python people? How about those Monty Python people?
Oh, those Monty Python. The Holy Grail is considered a classic on any level. Absolutely.
It's so good to be able to say that we've been lucky enough to live through these kind of changes in comedy, but fortunately it keeps going. It just keeps going. We need it. We need it now probably more than ever.
More than ever. And it is surprising to me that during times of strife and stress, et cetera, like in the 30s when movie audiences came out in droves to see madcap comedies of that time, the screwball comedies, Cary Grant, Ginger Rogers, Jean Harlow, all those famous actresses of that time, actors. I would think there would be more comedies today because we need more. We need to laugh more.
Who was the guy in the early days of movies with the cross eyes, and he'd play in the silent films?
His name was Ben Turpin.
Ben Turpin. That guy was funny just to look at. I'll tell you a groundbreaking movie that kind of jumped to different levels as the years went by. Porky's. Porky's came out in like 1979, 1980, and that broke through the wall of youth-oriented.
1982. I worked on Porky's 2. I was assigned to Porky's 2 as the unit publicist. I went down to Miami Beach. Porky's 1 was the first American comedy to make over $100 million at the box office. And it was what you call a very raunchy comedy.
Nothing like it up to that point, though, Steve,
nothing
right?
like it. I mean, they showed full frontal female nudity, which was unheard of for a mainstream movie. And it was quite a success. And it spawned a lot of raunchy comedies of that era.
Why did Porky's 2 die?
Porky's 2 died because it was not a very well-made movie. It was not as funny and unique as the first one. As interesting, as goofy and crazy as Porky's 1 was, it had a good B story about anti-Semitism in Florida at that time. People forget. And I think it had a lot more heart. Porky's 2 was just, I think it made some money, but it wasn't nearly as successful as the other.
Would we agree that Porky's, the first Porky's, begat others like it, but also begat a humongous series later on called American Pie?
Oh, sure. They all owe a debt to
Hangover.
The idea of, this is what I was told once, that the studios like raunchy comedy because they create noise. And in a very crowded media marketplace where there's so many reasons not to go to the movies, if you have a very raunchy comedy with some outrageous scenes, people will go see it. I think going back to what you said about Sacha Baron Cohen and Borat, there's some scenes in Borat pretty outrageous, and people talk about them at the water cooler.
Well, I want to
ever see Billy Madison?
I'd like to say one quick thing, that I think Animal House was the one that did it the most to get it beginning.
Billy Madison. Don't underestimate that. Adam Sandler, Bob Barker happened to be in it, and he just recently passed away, of course. But Billy Madison was a funny movie. Joke of the week: Toulouse-Lautrec, the famous Toulouse-Lautrec painter, who in Chicago said to a tall hooker, "I don't have to stand for this." Anyway, tall hooker in Chicago. I was thinking about Billy Madison and got confused. Anyhow, that's the joke of the week, I hope.
Now, if anybody wants to write to us and tell us what they thought of our shows or have ideas for new shows or want to make any other comment, we're very democratic about it. Please write to us at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. And that's Tales spelled Tales as opposed to Tails.
Yes. Well, all right. I think we're dramatic also, not just democratic. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Having fun. Have a nice week. Bye, guys.
Have a good one.